Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com. Today we're going to be going over the Ponziani Opening. Lately it has been the most requested video that I make, so for any of you out there wondering, if you email me or leave me a comment that lets me know of a video you want me to make, does it actually matter? Do I read those? I most definitely do. So for the many people who have asked for the Ponziani Opening, today we're going to go ahead and get into that. I'm going to try to make the most comprehensive video online. I've been looking at a few of them just to kind of see what's out there, because I definitely don't want to duplicate anything out there. Happy to say that this is going to be the best Ponziani Opening video that's available online. So if you're not too familiar with the Ponziani Opening, starts with Pawn E4, Pawn E5, Knight F3, simple development from white, trying to control the center and get his minor pieces involved into the game. Same with black here, Knight to C6. Now from here there are three options that white has. We do have the Ruy Lopez, which is bishop to B5. We also have the Italian game, which is bishop to C4. And we have the Ponziani Opening that we're going to be going over today, and that is pawn to C3. Now do keep in mind, I'm not trying to convince you that the Ponziani Opening is better than the Ruy Lopez, or it's better than the Italian game. In fact, it's actually easier for black to neutralize, to equalize the game easier in the Ponziani Opening. So you don't need to leave a comment and say, why would anyone play the Ponziani Opening? I can't believe you made this video. I'm simply making it because, one, there's a lot of different traps that white has, and black can get into a lot of trouble. And I don't think it's played enough, really, and it's not really studied that much at high levels of play to actually say that it's a terrible opening. So I've played it many times myself. I've played against it many times myself. If anything, I think it's very important for chess players to know about. So that's why we're going to be going over it today. And again, the Ponziani Opening starts with pawn to C3, and that's where we're going to be spending our time today. Now from here, black has three main options, two of which you'll see over and over, and then a third one which I throw in because it's actually the line that I play. It's the most aggressive. Not really going to say it's the best, but it does catch opponents off guard, so I thought I'd throw it in there for those of you who are like, I wonder what Kevin would do in this situation. So from there, we do have three options. Black does have Knight to F6, which you'll see very often, trying to control the center of the board, also trying to develop one of his minor pieces towards the center, always a good idea. You also have the sharp line, which is the D5, just thrusting forward, trying to control the center of the board. White, again, somewhat passive with this C3 move, blocking off the, development square here for the knight coming to C3. Obviously, with this pawn here on C3, later on in the game, the knight probably is going to be coming to knight to D2, which isn't typically a bad thing. It blocks it from C3, but it's still going to get into the game. So don't sit here and think, this C3 square, the knight will never get involved. He definitely will. So white kind of loses some tempo here with the pawn to C3, but white's really looking to thrust forward with his pawn here on D4. So just keep that in mind. Really doesn't matter where black is going to go. White's going to be thrusting forward with pawn to D4 at some point in the variation. So we do have D5, and then the last one, the most aggressive, that you may see black play. If you ever see me on chess.com and we're playing, you'll actually see me playing pawn to F5. Now again, not saying this is bad, worse, better, but obviously you may see this gambit here. Kind of plays similar to the Latvian gambit, if you're familiar with that gambit. Pretty fun gambit to play, so we do have that option. First option we are going to be looking at is Knight to F6. This you're going to see more times than not. I think it's a fine defense from black. Definitely gives him a lot of options, but there's so many different things that white can do in this game, as well as black can do, that I definitely want to go over this first. Now from here, white's going to continue as we talked about, and he's going to play pawn to D4. Now from here, and I'm actually going to be saying this quite often in the video, black has many different options. You may have to go back, pause it, write down some of these, have your chessboard out if you want to make sure that you're getting all the different variations. But black definitely has a lot of different options here. One of his options he can come down and he can take on E4. He can also, if he wants to, he can just come in and take here on D4 with his pawn, or he can always try and just push his pawn forward with D5 and try to really attack the center of the board here with his pawns. The first one we're going to talk about is knight takes on e4. Again, white is gambiting off this white pawn on e4. Gambit simply means that we're going to give up material for some reason. That could be to gain, a tempo. It could be to gain development. It could be to checkmate our opponent the next move. But we're going to be gambiting off this pawn here on e4 for the time being. Now from here, black has a few different moves, but really the only move that you're going to be playing is pawn to d5, trying to chase this knight away. Now keep in mind, he really has two main options. You're not really going to see knight to b4 or knight to a5. You're really going to be seeing knight to b8, and you also may see knight to e7. Now both have their pros and cons, so I do want to go over each of those. Knight to e7, as you can see, really starts to hinder the development of the black pieces. We can see here that this dark square bishop on f8 is going to have a very hard time developing into the game, so he's kind of blocking himself off. Also, he is really hampering this queen here on d8. White's camp is kind of opened up. He can get both of his light square bishop and his dark square bishop involved into the game. At any time, he can bring his knight to d2, really start to develop him. And his queen is also, he can be very active. He has this diagonal, here to a4, and he also has this d file that he can work with. So this is kind of cramping black style, but so many people don't want to also come back to b8 and say, you know what? I moved and then I just moved back. I kind of wasted a move here, so tempo-wise, black is down. Again, white gave up material, so this is kind of what he wants. He either wants to be up in development, have an extra tempo, or he wants to kind of block off black's move with that knight to e7. So as far as how to attack this, obviously we not only want to know where black could go, but how we can attack this. So from here, white's actually going to play bishop to e3. And you look at this and you say, Kevin, why don't we just take back this pawn here on e5? And that's a great question, but really we're going to. But this is kind of an in-between move here with bishop to e3, and we're kind of allowing black to hang himself. There's so many different ways that black can hurt himself that I really like this move, bishop to e3 here. Now currently black has one thing going for him. He is up in material, so what he really needs to do, he actually needs to hold on to that material advantage. Now this pawn here on e5 is hanging. Right now we are attacking it, or white's attacking it with this knight here on f3, so black would really like to reinforce this pawn here on e5. Now he does have a few options. He can always bring a pawn down to f6, he can always bring a pawn to d6, he can bring his queen to e7, or he can always bring his bishop to d6. All of these are going to defend the pawn here on e5. Now I do want to go over, because there are different things that black can do to hang himself, as we talked about. Let's say he plays pawn to f6. Now from here, white can simply continue to take here on e5. Even though black thinks he can retake, now the queen can come back to h5, and the king has to move. Obviously nothing can protect the king, so the king's going to have to come to e7. The queen now swoops in to e5, capturing, and he's also attacking the knight here on e5. So not only is the king no longer safe, no longer can he castle, no longer is black able to develop any of his pieces. White's going to take the only developed piece that black has, and he's going to be winning very, very easily in this game. So as you can see, pawn to f6 is going to be a epic fail for black. Now he also does have d6, which actually seems like a reasonable move if you look at it. Getting ready for his light square bishop to come into the game. Again supporting this pawn here on e5. But white here can just come, bring his queen to a4, attack the king here on e8, and also forking the knight here on e4. He is going to win a lot of material here, and also we are taking the only developed piece from black. While white has all this open space, he has two minor pieces and a major piece developed in the center of the board, and white is now up in material. So d6 is also going to be a very, very bad move for black. Now one of the better moves that black does have is he can bring his bishop down to d6. The only problem with this is it does really cramp the style of black. Black would really, at some point, obviously not right away as we talked about, he would like to start to move this pawn here on d7 forward so he can get his light square bishop involved into the game. Also, he would like a little air for his queen on d8 to move around. But what this does is it protects the pawn here on e5, and it also allows Black, if he wants to castle on the king side to get some sort of king side safety before he really starts to get his other pieces involved into the game. If you're up in material, anytime you can have king safety, doesn't matter if it's on the king side or queen side, and start to develop your pieces, you're going to be okay in the game. The problem that you have if you're up in material is a lot of times your king's exposed. The other person has all these aggressive attacks, or your pieces just aren't developed and you're just behind in tempos and things just go bad. So this is not a bad move for Black here, although he does have some problem that he's going to have to deal with later on into the game. Now from here, White's going to play knight to d2. Again, as we talked about, anytime we have this pawn here on c3, which we do in the Ponziani opening, we're now going to be bringing our knight to d2. Now again, we are attacking the most developed piece here from Black here on e4. So if he captures, if he takes on d2, our knight's now going to come back to d2, preparing for our knight coming to c4. Again, not only attacking the pawn on e5 here, but also attacking the bishop there on d6. Now from here, Black can, as we talked about, castle on the king side, and White's going to play knight to f4. Now, if you were to run this through the engine, even though White is down in material, he's down one pawn, the computers actually favor White in this position. As far as center control of the board, White is a little bit ahead. As far as open space, White can develop his pieces a lot more easily than Black can. He's also attacking this bishop. He can have a bishop pair if he wants to later on to the game. It's going to be very, very hard for Black to hold on to both this bishop and his pawn here on e5, and White should have a very, very solid game here. So just keep that in mind. This particular situation is going to be very, very good for White. Now if we come back here, instead of the bishop coming to d6, the last option was we talked about to defend this pawn on e5. He can bring his queen to e7. Now from here, White's going to continue with the same thing. Knight to d2, but now after Black captures with his knight, he's now going to bring his queen to d2. Again, before, White really wanted to recapture with his knight on d2 so that he could come to c4 and put a lot of pressure on that bishop that was on d6. The bishop's no longer on d6, so we can now recapture with our queen on d2. White, if he wants to, he can now castle on the queen side, really eyeing down on this d file, putting a lot of pressure with his queen and the rook. Or if he wants to at any time, he can develop his light square bishop and castle on the king side. But you can see here, Black's still going to have a hard time. His queen is blocking off his dark square bishop, so if you're Black in this position, it's going to be very, very hard for you to castle either way. It's going to be a few moves for you, where White can castle very easily and then start to attack. So White has a lot of different options, and the computer, again, even though White's down in material, still favors White's position. Now that was just if the knight comes back to b8. Black also does have the opportunity, as we talked about, to bring his knight back to e7, although as we said before, this does again hamper a lot of the development that Black has in the game. Again, Black wants to control the pawn that he's up in material, but again, he needs to really start to develop some of his pieces and not really cramp the style of all of his development. From here, White's going to continue. He's going to play knight takes on e5, and then Black has a few options here. His best option is actually to bring his knight and come to g6. Okay? But a lot of times you may see him try to kick off this knight here on e5, which is going to be a huge mistake. You may see f6, and you also may see d6. This is another one of those opportunities that White is giving Black just to simply hang himself. So d6 seems like a very, very logical move. Again, getting ready for this light square bishop to develop into the game, also trying to kick this knight off of e5. You never really want knights or any other major minor pieces kind of hanging out in your territory. So d6 seems like a logical move, but from here, White can play bishop to b5. Very, very powerful move. Again, this is check, so if for any reason Black tries to stop it, knight to c6 would be a mistake because the pawn would take it. Granted, this would be a mistake in general if you play d6, so it doesn't really matter what you play, it's going to be a mistake. But from here, if the pawn comes to c6, white can capture. If he doesn't recapture, he can always, play a move like pawn to c7, a discovered attack. So if white decides to recapture, he can recapture with his pawn on b7 taking on c6. Now from here, the knight can come into c6, attacking the queen here. Black has two options. If he takes here, then white's going to fork this rook here on a8. So obviously that's going to be very, very good for white. Also, black's going to have to move his king, or he could bring his bishop into the action, and again the rook would fall here. So if he does want to later on castle on the king side. Also, he can also bring his queen down to b6, but now white can play knight to d4. Again, discovered attack on the king here, and also defending the bishop here on b5. Now black does have two different options. He can just play, king to d8 if he wanted to, or he can always play his bishop to d7. Either way, it doesn't really matter. The king is going to have to move. He's going to be exposed, and he's no longer going to be able to castle on either side. The queen side has really opened up the game. Both the b and the c files are gone for black. So all white would have to do is castle on the king side here, and then really start to, have a humongous attack on the queen side. It's going to be very, very hard for an exposed king on the queen side for black to really, really defend himself. So very, very good option for white, and he's also going to be up in material. So just keep this in mind. This is going to be, if he plays that pawn to d6, that's definitely going to be a mistake. Now, he might not play pawn to d6. He could also play pawn to f6, as we talked about before. But from here, it's very easy. The knight can just come back to c4. Very, very simple. And as you can see here, black still is hampered in development. His dark square bishop can't get out into the game. His queen can't move. His light square bishop can't move. His knight here on e4 is kind of hanging. Eventually, he's going to have to, solidify that and protect this. And also, the king side safety is in question now. We can start to put a lot of pressure on this square here on h5, attack it. But the king is really going to have to castle on the queen side now to have some sort of safety, as we can already see from here. It's going to take a few moves for that safety to come along. So really the best move from black here is if he plays knight to g6. Now from here, if white wants to continue, he can always come to d4, again attacking this hanging knight on e4. Play may continue. There are a few variations, but play may continue with the queen coming to f6, and then after a few exchanges, then the knight can come to d2, and then with the solidification of the knight here on e6, then white can play knight to c4, again threatening this knight here on e5, and he can also recapture with his bishop on c4 if he wants to. Again, as far as the development in the game, as you can see, both sides are equal in material. Again, the computer favors white in this position right here. So while so many people say that black can equalize very, very easily in the Ponziani opening, that may be true, but white has so many different variations, so many different traps that he can set, and so many different ways to keep his advantage. It's actually not a bad opening at all. So some of the things to keep in mind, again, that is if the knight comes back to b8 and if it comes back to e7. Now, those were the variations if black played knight takes on e4, as we talked about before. Now we're going to be talking about if black takes here on d4. Now from here, white's going to push forward. He's going to play pawn to e5. Now black has two options in this situation. He can either play knight to e4, or he can also come into knight to d5. So I definitely want to make sure that we cover both of those options. If he comes down to knight to e4, white's now going to play queen to e2. Again, attacking the knight here on e4. Anytime your opponent has his knight coming to this fourth rank here, really getting to your territory, you really want to attack it so he can really start to commit and try to defend that knight by any different variation that he wants to. Now black does have two different options here. He can solidify this. He can always move it back if he wants to. Obviously his really only move would be knight to c5, which I think would be a mistake. Obviously he can't come back to d6, he would lose it, or f6, he would move it, lose it. Even if he brought it back to g5, we have both our bishop on c1 and our knight on f3 attacking that. But black could try to solidify it with either pawn to d5 or the pawn coming to f5. Now, if the pawn comes down to f5, simple development move from black, then white can play en passant. So pawn takes on d6. Now, again, before anyone makes a comment that says, Kevin, that's an illegal move, I've never heard of en passant, so it can't be true. You can actually capture like this. If you really want to know how it works, you can just Google or Wikipedia en passant. But if you're on the 5th rank, if for white and black moves up 2 moves, you can capture like this. That's not an illegal move. That's legal. So from here, black can continue again and try to solidify this knight here on e4. And then here, white can play knight capturing on d4. And then if black wants to, he can recapture with his knight. And then the pawn's going to recapture here on d4. This is going to be a very, very good game for white as well. So that's one option. He can also, if he wanted to, first come down and solidify with his pawn on f5. And then after en passant here, then the pawn can come down to d5. And again, as we talked about before, the knight can come to d4 capture. And we're going to kind of have some of the same game. Now, as you can see here, at any time, white can push forward, sacrifice another pawn to force out this king to take on f7. Obviously, the king, if he wanted to, could come to d7. He could also come to e7. But anytime white does have the opportunity, if it's not taken right away, to push forward to f7, just to kind of draw out the king, which is always fun. Just if you want to just start attacking your opponent's king, you can always push forward with the pawn here on f7. So again, this is going to be what happens if black captures, as we talked about before in the Ponziani opening, if he captures with his pawn on d4, compared to if he captures with his knight here on f6 and takes here on e4. Now, last option that black has after he plays knight to f6 and white pushes forward with his pawn to d4, again, very common as we talked about, he can also thrust forward with pawn to d5. Again, very, very aggressive move from black. Very sharp lines in this variation, trying to counterattack the center. Really trying to test white to see if he studies his lines, to see who is really going to come out on top. Now from here, white's going to play a bishop to b5, pinning down this knight here on c6, really trying to figure out what black is going to do. Again, this knight here on c6 is a well-developed move, but it's also defending this pawn here on e5, and it's also attacking the pawn here on d4. So anytime you can develop your pieces, in this case we're developing our bishop, our light square bishop, allowing our king to castle on the king side, but also removing this defender, because this knight here on c6 can no longer come into the action to d4 or on e5. So from here, black does have a few options. He can always take with his pawn here on e4. From here, white can push forward with his pawn. You'll see this a lot in the Ponziani opening. Anytime one of the pieces moves, you're going to push forward and try to kick this knight away. Now the knight from here is going to come down to e4, and then white's going to recapture with his knight here on d4. Again, putting a lot of pressure on this knight on c6, and this knight is also being pinned down to the king here on e8. Now he doesn't have to take with his pawn on e5. He could also, if he wants to, capture on, as we can see here, on e4 as well. So from here, white's now going to take on e5. Now he is putting a lot of pressure on this knight here on c6. If black wanted to come in and kick that bishop off, he could always come down to a6. After the exchange here, then the queen could now come into a5 and put a lot of pressure on this pawn on c6. So again, black has doubled pawns here. He doesn't have a pawn on the b or the d file. This is going to be a very, very good game from white. So again, there's so many different variations. So it's very, very important that you understand all the different ways that black can attack you and how to counterattack those as well. The last one I do want to talk about, again, the knight can't come down and capture on d4, but the knight on f6 can come down and capture with his knight taking on e4. From here, white's going to continue, do the same thing. He's going to take with his knight here on e5, putting a lot of pressure again on this knight on c6. If black wants to play his bishop to d7, again, trying to break this pin that the bishop has, then after the exchange, this is not a bad exchange for white at all. After the exchange, same thing as we talked about before, white can castle on the king side, and black does have these doubled pawns here on the c file. So again, this is still going to be a very, very good game from white. He can start to get his knight developed, his rook developed to the e file, this open file. Obviously, black is going to get his dark square bishop involved into the game, castle on the king side, but white should have a very, very good game from here as well. So that's going to happen if the black side decides to push forward with his pawn to d5. Now, those are quite a few variations. Those are all for if black plays knight to f6. Black, again, does not have to play knight to f6. One of the sharpest moves, and again, one of the most popular moves, second only to knight to f6, is actually pawn to d5. A very, very sharp line from black, probably one of the sharpest that he can play in this situation, minus the gambit here on f5. Now from here, white's going to do the same thing. So very, very common theme. Whereas before, white and black had a lot of different options, this one's going to be a little bit more straightforward. The queen's now going to come to a4, and he's going to try to pin down this knight here on c6 to the king. He's also going to try to protect this pawn here on e4. If he doesn't have to, he really doesn't want to play a move, like bishop to d3, really hampering his, dark square bishop development. Can't really move his pawn for a while. If he doesn't have to, his first move, he really doesn't want it to be pawn to d3 if he doesn't have to, simply because he is now blocking off his light square bishop development. So instead, he's now going to bring his queen to a4. Again, be aggressive sometimes. In this case, you definitely need to be aggressive. Again, pinning down this knight and also defending this pawn here on e4. Now from here, black can do one of a couple things. He can bring his queen down to d6 if he wanted to. From here, white can start to, try to harass this queen here on d6. He can play knight to a3, getting ready for his knight to come to b5. Black can now start to put more pressure. He can play knight to f6, again, really starting to attack this pawn here on e4. White now has to play knight to b5, trying to distract this queen on d6. After the queen moves, and now, white can play pawn to d3. So again, from here, white can always bring his bishop to e2, castle on the king side if he wants to. He's a little bit weak in his pawn structure, but he can still have a very, very good game from here. Now, if we come back a few moves, I'll just go through them again. After d5 here, and the queen comes to f4, now the bishop can also come to d7. You may not see the queen come down to d6. A lot of people like to deal with, a pinned down knight, which is bringing their bishop down to d7. So if you do see this, instead, we can now just play pawn takes on d5. Now it does get very, very crazy because black can now play knight to d4. So this is a very, very aggressive line from black. As you can see, he's hanging his knight here on d4, but he also has a discovered attack with, his bishop here on d7 on this queen here on a5. So again, very, very aggressive line from black. This is going to be very, very sharp. So anytime you see black play d5 at the beginning, it's going to be a very, very sharp line. So just keep that in the back of your mind when you are playing. So again, he doesn't have to play d5. The last variation I do want to talk about is the Gambit, the F5 move. So again, the Gambit from here plays very similar to the Latvian Gambit in some respects, but it's just pawn to f4. Now, I've actually played this a few times against people that have tried the Ponziani Opening, and a couple of the games are actually in person, a couple of them were online. When I play these in person, I kind of got to look like I don't know what you were doing, but you're either really good or you are just straight bad at chess. So it's always fun to play a move like that just to get that reaction. From here, after white takes on f5, then the black queen can come down to f6, again putting a lot of pressure on this f5 square, and he's also, trying to attack and control this long dark diagonal. Now from here, white has a few options. More than likely he's going to play pawn to d5, or excuse me, pawn to d4. Again, that's the main reason that white plays pawn to c3, is really to thrust forward with his pawn to d4. Again, he has not only this pawn on c3, he has this knight here on f3 protecting, and he also has the queen here on d1. So there's no reason for him not to try to control all the dark squares at the center of the board with pawn to d4. Now from here, black's going to just start pushing forward. He's going to play pawn to e4. Again, as we talked about, main theme in the Ponziani opening, both sides trying to push forward, trying to move those knights off of those critical squares of c6, f6, f3, and the c3 squares. So from here, white's going to have to move. He can bring his knight to g5, probably the best square for him. It is very, very aggressive, and it's also being defended by the bishop here on c1, so really there's no reason not to. You definitely don't want to bring him back to d2, hinder the development of your minor and major pieces, and you definitely don't want to bring him back to g1 after you develop your pieces. If you don't have to, you don't want to bring them back to the square they came from. Now from here, black does have a few options, but his best move is just to play pawn to d5. And this does a few things. First, it opens up the door for his light square bishop to get involved into the game. It also solidifies this pawn here on e4. This becomes a very, very powerful pawn for black later on to the game. It's also being attacked by the knight here on g5. So he needs to not only solidify this, but he also needs to put more pressure on this pawn here on f5. Now keep in mind, white is up in material. Black gambited off a pawn on f5, so white has a few options. He can give up this pawn, he can give it back to black, or he can try to hold on to it. So again, it doesn't really matter which way white wants to go. If he does want to try to hold on to it, he can play pawn to g4. Again, light square bishop can no longer come in and take it. He is being defended by the pawn here on g4. This starts to get really crazy. There's not too much theory on it, but black now can play pawn to h5, and it just gets messy from here. Just chaos all over the board. As you can see, white's no longer going to be able to safely castle on the king side. Later on he can try to castle on the queen side, but it's not that safe as well. Black pretty much has given up on castling on the king side. He can always castle on the queen side. He is down in material, but he's really trying to break up this pawn structure right here that he has, trying to control this f5 square. So there's so many different sharp lines. This is just a fantastic game to play. I've come to this exact position quite a few times when I play as black in the Ponziani opening, and I can tell you from first-hand experience, there's just fireworks all over the board. So this is the Ponziani opening. I know there was a lot of different variations. I wanted to make sure I covered everything to make sure that if you're white or black, that you don't fall into traps, that you know exactly what you're looking for, that you don't have to think a lot of different lines. Where should I be going? You know exactly what to do. Feel free to try it out. I know many people will tell you that it's a terrible opening. Again, I'm not trying to tell you it's the greatest opening ever, or GM should be playing it every time they play chess. But I do think it's important to know, and I think you can have great success if you know exactly what you're doing in the Ponziani opening. So feel free to play around. Let me know what you guys think. Tell me if you have success or failures with it. Also, again, if you have a video that you want to see, whether it's me playing, whether it's commentating other games, whether it's an opening, whether it's deep analysis of various lines as we did in the Sicilian, definitely let me know. I have a list of moves videos that I want to make, but if people let me know of a very specific one, definitely feel free to let me know, and I'll definitely make sure that I make that. If you guys haven't already, again, check out the website, thechesswebsite.com, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.